fans, wherever you may be. Welcome back for another edition of the Seahawks Playbook Podcast. Join your host, Bill Alvstad, and co-host, sports writer and football analyst Keith Myers, as we talk Seahawks football. Seahawks Playbook Podcast listeners, thanks for joining us for another edition of the show. You can find us on Twitter. Bill is at NWSeahawk, Keith is at Myers NFL, and the show is at Hawks Playbook. You can listen and subscribe to the show at SeahawksPlaybook.com.
Over the years.
Yeah, and so Sheldon Richardson and Jadeveon Clowney are the best two examples where they traded away a ton of resources for a single player for a single year. Yes. Let's go win it now. And it didn't work. In both of those, like they had a good player for a year, but then that player walks, and it's like, okay, now you're without that player and without the draft.
Quite honestly, your statement is not correct. I don't believe that those players were very good when they came in. Like Sheldon Richardson had one of his poorest years as a pro when he was in Seattle, and Clowney was injured often and really only impacted one or two games where he wrecked a game. San Francisco being the biggest game there. Mm-hmm. So, and then Jamal Adams hasn't yet wrecked a game. Maybe a little bit here and there peripherally. He's been injured. He's wrecked himself, which is my biggest fear with him is he's a great player. And I do believe that he adds significantly to the roster more than most fans will give him credit for. But he is a guy that's susceptible to shoulder and other injuries because of the way that he plays. So it'll be interesting to see. I totally agree with your assessment. You are spot on exactly what has happened to this roster and what has happened to this team is a perfect assessment. So now, and I'll just go along on this show. What is the answer? So everyone wants heads to roll in that, especially Twitter, which is fine. But you also see that from legitimate sources that follow this team on a daily basis in the media. And you're starting to just get this kind of, the heaps out there on the radio. Brock Heward, some of the other coaches that have been around for a while are starting to inject now the narrative that your assessment is kind of being overlooked a little bit, and it's more of a change assessment that needs to happen regardless over the top of everything else. Mm-hmm. How do you kind of pull that back in, and what's the path?
Well, I think we circle all the way back to one of the first points we talked about at the beginning of the show, which is Jody Allen saying this isn't a one-year blip, that we got here because of multiple years in a row of playing for right now, instead of looking at the health of the franchise as a whole, and rolling everything back and bringing it back all next year for one more shot involves a lot of other moves that are for right now, and not for.
Hold on, stop. Outline that. What does that mean to you?
What does that mean? That means maybe paying for Dwayne Brown, even though it's not in the team's best interest to do so, but it keeps that spot. It's maybe trading away more future picks for another pass rusher or a cornerback, or it's making moves that are for next year that even if they do benefit the team next year, they hurt the team the year after.
Can they do it both? Can they have both? Can they get key pieces and start to turn the philosophy of building the roster the right way?
I think they can.
With the same people in charge.
I think they can, but I think you have to commit to that next year's not the year. Next year could be a year, but it isn't the year. And you have to be okay with that. And honestly, from Pete Carroll's time in Seattle, I don't believe he will be okay with that. He wants to win right now. And I don't blame him for wanting to win right now. He's 70. You got certain pieces in place. You go figure out what's necessary. What's the biggest piece you can go add? You add it and you play for.
And you have a franchise quarterback that
right now
is on a 2-year deal.
Yeah. So you go do what you've got to do in order to get through everything. And I think in Pete Carroll's, but I think that all you're doing, if you do that, even if next year works and you get a deep run into the playoffs and whatnot,
is it worth it?
You're still looking at 2023 being.
Yes. At some point, something is going to break and it's going to go completely away.
Yes. And that's kind of what we've got this year. Is they've kept kicking this can down the road so many times that we've reached a point where things are breaking.
Yes.
And
it's kind of a metaphor for my body, by the way. I'm just saying.
So it comes down to, and this is why I'm starting to think that this is what's going to happen, is that Jody Allen and the other execs and the people, the high end at Vulcan are going to come in and be like, okay, we've got to change our method of operation, at least for a couple of years. We've got to get this healthy so we don't become, the Jaguars and where we're at the bottom, which that's probably a bad, let's go say the Raiders that make a run and then disappear.
Yeah.
And they don't want to be the team that disappears. So you want to figure out a way to make it work. So what do we have to do that? And that's going to be to rein in Pete Carroll's desire to win right now and do everything to trading away the future to win now.
Yeah. So he signed. Here's the hope that the deal is that he is under contract. He signed a deal to sign up to coach a team for 4 or 5 more years.
Yep.
He's under contract until 2027.
No, so Pete Carroll's under contract 2025.
Okay,
he's got 3 more years.
So he's signed up. All right. I know that his desire wants to win, but he also wants to build a legacy. He wants to build a team that consistently wins over time. Both things can be true. And so I'm trying to figure out a way to marry your ideas, which are completely factual and accurate, with the idea of building sustainability again with this roster.
So if you want to build sustainability with this roster, you have to take the Bill Belichick approach to the roster. And that is let guys go a year early rather than a year late. You've got to trade away a guy that everybody loves, like Bobby Wagner, because he's got value and you can get a draft pick for him and you can replace him with a young, hungry player. Whereas if you wait another year,
who also happens to be on your roster already.
Yeah. But you know what I mean? If you wait another year, he walks, or he retires, you get nothing back for him.
And he's diminishing. He's going to have diminishing returns anyway because of his age and so his playing ability.
As painful as that was, at some point you reach a point where you have to start doing that. If you want to build this consistent winner, you have to be okay with roster turnover, and you've got to be constantly reloading and not trying to keep a core together. But you go, you know what, we need to constantly be rebuilding.
Unless you get that core, like the 2012-13 core, you keep around for a while. But
you do. Yeah,
we don't have that at all.
We don't
have, that's not nearly where we're at in this.
No, and even if you look at the Patriots of their era, like their dynasty.
Yes.
Other than their quarterback, who's now gone, who was their core? Who was that group of people that they kept around every year, because they were the core, and especially on defense, because that was a defense-driven team. And you're going to find that guys came and went.
Yeah, they had a couple linebackers, Teddy Bruschi and a few other guys, and
Mike Vrabel, who's now a head coach. You got a couple guys.
Right.
There's a couple guys, but the Jason Seymours and the Chandler Jones and a bunch of other really good players that you'd think of as part of a championship core that you'd want to keep around. They came, they played, they got traded for draft picks. Yes. And if you're gonna let a guy walk, trade him a year earlier and get the return for him.
Yeah.
So you're constantly have the picks to consistently reload. And the Seahawks are in a position where they don't have the picks to reload this year because they've been trading away their first round picks for too long, and they don't have the talent to keep, and they don't have a lot of assets that they could trade to get those. So that's why they're in a situation where I don't know if it's a both situation, because you have to build that. The Seahawks were in that position a few years ago. I think if instead of cutting Richard Sherman, if you'd traded him, they can't do that because he torn his Achilles. But they could, those are the types of situations. They lost Cam Chancellor and Cliff Averill to injury.
Yeah, certain things happen that are out of your control. But.
Yeah, those are the things that really hurt. But creating an opportunity where you can, so that the whole idea kind of fell apart. But there was a time when this roster was loaded enough that they could have been like, you know what? Earl Thomas is super unhappy. Let's go ahead and trade him. Get some draft picks for him, and instead they didn't. They waited, and then he gets hurt, so he becomes untradeable. Yeah. He flips off the coach, and
the rest is history.
And so he's not. You can't re-sign him, and he's not coming back. And you had this, Hall of Fame player that left for nothing, because you mishandled his situation. And I think that's ultimately where you run into problems. If they had traded him a year earlier, gotten whatever it was they could get for him, even if it was like a second and third round pick.
Do you think the greed of roster building for winning now is the demise of this current state of the franchise?
Yes.
And to get it back, do you trust the same people to go forward?
Honestly, no.
John Schneider.
Well, I'm talking about Pete Carroll.
Let's talk about John Schneider's role in this.
We don't know John Schneider's role in this because Pete Carroll has 100% roster control.
So I think that John Schneider then is good enough to man it if Pete moves on. Now, say Pete stays. I do believe that that's the case. I think Pete stays. I think everything kind of stays together. And I think they do the happy medium thing, which is still winning now, because Pete's not going to want to win. He's not going to want to not win. He's going to want to do everything he can to win. That's fine. That's his coaching job. That's a separate job than personnel. If he could somehow separate the personnel thing and allow Schneider to kind of just begin the process of moving personnel into the right positions of strength, the trenches and so forth, to kind of get this back on track long term, while also, you mentioned cap resources this year. I think we have somewhere in the neighborhood of between $45 and $55 million to start, not having a left tackle, not having a center, not having maybe a defensive tackle and a back end we're going to have to replace, but we do have an asset in Bobby Wagner at $20 million. We could save $17 million on. So you add that back in. and build around that. I mean, we've got some resources to begin this process of at least reshaping the roster to match scheme. And if we keep the same coaching staff. And then on the draft part, we are missing the first round draft pick, but we do have high picks in each round and a couple of fourth rounders, I think. 7 picks overall.
7 picks overall. There's like no 6th round pick, but it's like 2 4th, 2 5th, and all the picks all the picks are going to be early in the draft because this team's not good, except for they don't have that 1st round pick, which is too bad. But and I don't know if it works that way, because the way that everything is set up, the way that this working relationship has been for more than a decade, how the decisions are made, all of that process, you don't just change all that. You don't have Pete Carroll disappear from those meetings and no longer
but he may come to a realization that we've come to. I mean, obviously. I mean, he's a great personnel guy. He just is. He's been around the NFL for a long time. They've done this before. It's not like this is foreign. I think they probably understand the same, obviously, the same formula, the same discussions are going on that we're having. The question is, can they take action on it?
I don't know if that's true. I don't know if that's true because I don't know if they've had this discussion, then they wouldn't.
I mean, the blinders are definitely on.
They wouldn't have traded for Jamal Adams. That trade wouldn't have happened. And
the contract wouldn't have been extended this year. I mean, the trade maybe, but to keep it to perpetuate it with a long-term deal is a second sinking.
Yeah, and so you have this is a team that I think you look at it and you have that situation where you have they believe they're close. They believe they're right there. They need 1 or 2 pieces. They just need some things to click, right? So this year would have clicked except for both their offensive tackles play dropped off. So if they could have fixed that and not had all of their running backs get hurt at the same time, the offense would have been fine, and this team would be rolling. And their quarterback, injury and both missing time and then not being as good when he comes back. Like they look at this and like, there all these things just kind of everything went wrong and that had to go wrong in order for this team to fail. That can't happen, year in, year out. So what do we need to do? What can we do? What do we need to do to get us? Okay, so we need to replace this player and we need to upgrade there and we need to do this. And all right, now we'll be ready to go. Let's roll. Let's get out there and contend again. And that's going to be the mindset every year until either the bottom falls out, which is happening this year, but not in a way that's going to wake people up.
What force, what power, what mind scheme did Pete Carroll and John Schneider go into when they had 275 transactions in a calendar year?
Okay, so that's
different between then and now.
So when they did that was them coming into a roster that was terrible. It was old. It was expensive.
They're coming into a roster that's terrible, old, and expensive.
Yeah, but they don't see it that way. They don't see it that way. The other thing that they went into in that particular year is they went into a one-time weird CBA.
Would they be forced into it though, based on the record and the fact that they're last place now?
No.
I mean, I'm just asking for a friend. How do they approach the roster that's obviously a failure?
Because it's more than just the roster. When they came in for 2010, they also came into a one-time situation of an uncapped year. They could cut loose bad contracts like TJ Husmann-Jada at no cost in terms of dead cap room or anything. There's no dead cap anything. So they cut loose a lot of those contracts, which meant they had nothing on the roster. I mean, they had a few things, but mostly that roster was bare by the time they got done cutting loose the bad contracts, which they could get rid of because of the uncapped year. And so at that point, they're just looking for talent. The 275 roster transactions was to get as many players through in 1 year so they could look at as many different people and see if they can find pieces, athletes, anyone And for that point, they were just trying to mine for talent. They weren't, in that sense, they weren't building anything because they were starting from them at bedrock, right? There's nothing, not even a ground floor, like just even below that bedrock, and they're trying to build up from there. And they're in a different spot now. They don't view it as that. They've got their franchise quarterback. They've got what they believe are key franchise pieces. Their view of what the roster is fixable. We've got Russell Wilson. We can contend now.
Yes.
Let's go contend now and screw the future. It's just a different thing. And I think that if you have that attitude, you can't step back and be like, okay, let's go back to 2010 and start that process over, because that's a total rebuild. But you can't even really do that because you're not in an uncapped year. You couldn't just go through and just start cutting people left and right and clearing up salary room.
But we have a fairly malleable roster. I mean, we don't have a huge amount of bad contracts on this roster.
True. Besides Jamal Adams.
Yeah. So it's going to be interesting. I mean, you take a look at the Dwayne Brown situation. You take a look at the Carlos Dunlap situation. Bobby Wagner, etc. So anyway,
yeah, right. It's going to be a difficult offseason no matter what. It's either going to be difficult because the team's not going to do what's necessary in order to move this process forward, or it's going to be a difficult offseason because we're going to see players we really like leave. So either way, it's going to be a difficult offseason. You're either going to have Bobby Wagner go, and everyone's going to be disappointed and upset and all of those things, or you're not going to see him go, and you're not going to see any of the other players go, and it's going to be a difficult offseason because this team is just kicking the can down the road one more time. And if you're just kicking the can down the road one more time, you're not starting the necessary process to get everything fixed. And so it's going to be difficult either way, no matter which direction they head. And that, I think, is the ultimate problem. And me personally, after this year and what we've seen and how we've seen kind of this roster construction just start to become a mess, I'm ready personally to start the process of fixing it, and not just kicking this can down the road and hurting the future more for one more chance. Let's start the process now. Let's go ahead and let Dwayne Brown walk. Let's trade Jamal Adams if he's tradable. Let's cut or trade Carlos Dunlap if you can. If you can trade him, do it. If not, cut him and get the cap room. Go spend it on younger players. Go find a Michael Bennett or a Cliff Averill, someone that's in their prime, not someone who's 34.
Yeah. Don't rely on guys like Benson Mayo to make a difference on your roster.
Yeah. Go. I mean, they've been bargain shopping for guys like that for way too long. Go get a guy that's in his prime as a difference maker that you don't have to trade assets for. You can just go sign and accumulate some draft picks, draft some young players, make some hard decisions on current guys, especially popular current guys, and give us a future. Give us a roster that has a future, because right now they don't have one. I mean, how many guys on the roster right now will be on this team and significant contributors in 3 years?
Probably less than 10.
Yeah, and that's a problem. That's a massive problem.
Yeah, so and it should be, and that number should be about 20.
Yeah, it should be about 20, and it should be about 20 for every NFL team. And for Seattle, I think it's 8 or 7, 6.
Yeah, we're definitely in a transition time period.
Yeah, and so we either start the transition or we roll it back one more time. And if we roll it back one more time, we make that transition harder when we do get there. And that's how you go from. So the Seahawks kind of did this, right? A few years ago when they rolled things back a little bit. They made a little bit of a transition. They started looking, a little bit more towards the future, and they were able to take a couple steps back, but then push it forward a little bit. But they didn't do it enough. And so you end up in a situation where in 2 or 3 years, if we just kick this can down the road, the bottom will fall out of this in the way that it fell out underneath Mike Holmgren, where he went from, that team that was competitive, that was winning, and then all of a sudden it was bad. It was
so what you're saying. Bad. So what you're saying is we have more options now than we would have a year from now or 2 years from now, where Russell Wilson now gives us options. It's like we can build around that. There's something significant to build around if everyone's on the same page.
Yeah.
If we're not, if we've got Pete wants to go this way, Schneider really kind of wants to go this way, Jody Allen and ownership wants to go another way, the only option, and because of that uncertainty, Russell Wilson wants to go a completely different way. So, and that's the thing, because of that uncertainty, you've got to solve this problem. This has to be solved. Not only in January, like literally a month from now, we're going to need to be talking about where we're going. Like it has to be solved by then.
If Russ wants to leave, then there's no kicking this can down the road for another year.
No, because that changes everything.
Because there's absolutely no contending without him next year.
I think he's going to need to come out like right away too, and either stop the speculation or start the speculation. It's going to have to come directly from him. We can't have an offseason of this like mindless national narrative around Russell Wilson wanting to leave and then not, and then all that bullshit. It needs to be handled appropriately right off at the end of the year press conference. Like, I'm with this team. This is the path, blah, 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 blah. Or shortly thereafter, along with Pete Carroll. I mean, it really does it's going to have to happen fairly quickly. Otherwise, this franchise is going to be in disarray. Even 3 or 4 weeks can be damaging to the prospects of free agency and all that stuff. Because
if you have all this talk where it's, Russ is going to leave and all of that, but you're trying to reset, sign some big time free agents and go contend next year, they're not going to come here. They're not going to come here for a rebuild.
No.
Unless you're just really throwing money at them that no one else is. And that's not a way to build a franchise either. And if Russ is going to leave, you don't want to go throw the money at those particular guys. You want to go find some younger players that have some years, that have, that kind of stuff. Though it's a different sell.
You're going to have a completely different scheme making those decisions. It's just going to be it's going to be tumultuous.
Because
tumultuous there.
If Russell Wilson leaves, does Pete Carroll stay to oversee the rebuild that has to happen? Because that becomes, you can't kick it down the road. You can't make those what's good for us right now.
So it's chicken and the egg.
Everything
scenario,
has to be, and everything
what happens
has to
first?
Be for us.
What's the first thing that happens?
What's the first thing that happens?
Pete Carroll's the guy that has to decide.
I actually don't think so.
You don't think so? I do.
I think Russell Wilson will be the guy that decides. Because if Russell Wilson comes out and says, "I'm here,"
I don't know that he's trumping his coach, though.
Here's the thing. If he comes out and says, "I'm here for the long term," then that gives Pete permission to kick this can down the road for another year and run everything back and try it. And Pete Carroll then stays and does all that, unless Jody Allen steps in and says no. But I think but if Russ comes out and says, I want to run this back. I want to do this one more time. Let's go do this. Let's give this one more shot. I think she'll let it go and let it go for another year. And so it really comes down. I think he ends up being the decision maker when it all is said and done. Because if he comes out and says, you know what, I'm ready for something different. I'm ready to try something else. Let's go ahead and make a move. Then it becomes, can Jody Allen sell him on, okay, if you're really ready to try something else, let's try something else in Seattle and get rid of Pete and company. Or, and if that's not good enough for him because he wants to play for a contender is something else, then you're starting a rebuild. And if at that point, if you're starting the rebuild, then decisions have to be made on who's going to oversee the rebuild. And maybe it is Pete because he wants to leave a legacy and wants to rebuild the roster back to a point where it's a contender before he leaves. Or maybe we just go, you know what, if we're going to build this, let's build it. Let's let somebody build it for themselves and not be building it for someone else. Let's let somebody build it in their own image. And go ahead and let Pete go and that kind of stuff. So I honestly think that this is all decided.
So Russell Wilson is the kingmaker, and it happens within a month.
Yeah.
Like before the Super Bowl is finished, this franchise will know its direction. And
I don't know if before the Super Bowl, but I'll say before the NFL Combine. In that 2 to 3 week window between the Super Bowl and the NFL Combine, that's when everything happens. I would think it would happen before that because you want your personnel at the Combine, but yeah, absolutely. I mean, that would be definitely the bottom line. And Combine this year's March 1st. Yeah, so it's going to happen in that time in times because Wilson's going to want to leave and get away from the team and get home with his wife and decide what he wants. And meetings have to happen and people got to talk and all of that. He's got to meet with his agent. He's going to have to meet with Pete Carroll. Jody Allen's going to contact him. There's a lot of stuff that has to happen after that.
Can you imagine the level of speculation that is going to go on in the 3 weeks after the last snap? It is going to be just mind-boggling. And how do you keep everything clear? I mean, it's just going to be so noisy. I don't even know.
Yeah. And as a team, I mean, that might be something where if you're Jody Allen, you're like, no, I got to force this issue and not let it.
I agree. I think so.
Because it's not just the 3 weeks between the Super Bowl and the Combine. It's the 3 weeks from week 18 till the Super Bowl because this team this team's not making the playoffs. So their last snap's going to be week 18.
Well, that's why I said right after the season to the Super Bowl would be the time that you want to squash this if you're going to squash it.
Yeah.
Because then everything happens behind closed doors and it's just better for your franchise, I think.
Well, and if you're
for your character. If you're Russell Wilson, I think you show better.
Yeah.
If you're able to handle your business in a non-public way.
And I think if you come out and as a team, if you are going to make massive changes, you want there to be the most possibilities. You want it to be at a time when assistant coaches are weighing their options on which team to join or whether to sign an extension or possibly get a promotion. You want those options. You don't want to deal with the leftovers. So getting out in front of it isn't a bad thing. But with Seattle, they're not going to be out in front of it. You've got teams that are already searching for their head coach. They're already talking to people because they've already fired their head coach, right? And Seattle's, if they fire Pete Carroll, they're looking for a president. They're looking for direction. They're looking for a foundation that they can make decisions from. And they have to start there.
Those lists are already being built if that's happening.
Yeah. Oh, I would be willing to bet that they've got names. They've talked to people.
They've got at least four seriously considered written plans in this offseason. I guarantee it.
They've already got them. And they'll deny the existence of any of them at all times because they don't want to be like, oh yeah, they're already discussing if what happens if Pete Carroll leaves. Yeah. Because then it makes it sound like they want Pete Carroll gone, and it's just an option that Pete might leave, so they want to be prepared.
Yes.
And correct. So yeah.
Wow, fascinating stuff.
But yeah.
Wow. And this is the first conversation.
It is. I'm going to talk you into. I'm going to talk you into this being
over yet.
I'm going to talk you into this being a 2-part conversation, and we're going to find a spot in the middle to cut it, because this was a long conversation.
It's a long conversation, but it is fun. It kind of harkens back to the old shows that we used to do prior to September, October.
I do kind of miss some of the old shows where we got a chance to really dive in like this, where we really got a chance to really dive into a topic and spend more time with it.
I agree. I think maybe once a month we do that. So the rest of the year plays out. We've got Chicago coming up on Sunday. It's a meaningless game. These are meaningless games other than staying healthy, finding out who you've got personnel wise to go forward with. One of the best things that happened, I think, this season so far is the emergence of Jake Curran on the offensive line, knowing that one of 3 spots that we knew we were going to have to handle in the offseason is possibly set now is a kind of comforting feeling to me, because and it comes at one of the most important positions in the trenches on the offensive line that we've talked about being
so at this point it feels like the worst case scenario at right tackle is a competition between Jake Curran and Stone Forsythe,
or a 1-year deal with Shell coming back, just on a simple contract, just because.
But you don't need to do that. You've got 2 guys. So
true. That's true.
I think the worst case scenario is that you have a competition between those 2 guys. And well, I guess maybe the worst case scenario is that you sign Shell, you bench those other 2 guys, and you don't consider them because they're not veterans.
What do you do with Brown on the other side? I mean, do you let the second place guy go over and man the left side of your offensive line? No. So
at that's a position you have to address. If you could
get Dwayne Brown for a 1-year deal, you might do it. You might consider it if he considers it.
If he considers it and Russell Wilson stays, sure.
Yes.
You can.
It's not a great, healthy deal for your franchise to do that. The only reason you would do that is because you don't have your first round pick and you're not able to get the guy that you need to get in free agency.
So if it's like a 1-year deal, just recognize you're getting, as we saw from last year to this year, diminishing returns every year on him. But that would bridge you to either Stone Forsythe becoming ready or a third option that we don't have yet. Yeah. And so you have the competition at right tackle. So you've gotten young and better there. You bring Brown back, and then you spend your resource, whether it be your draft pick or your free agent money at center, because you need it. And so then you end up, okay, now you've got long-term options at 4 of your 5 positions, and you're on the last year of your left tackle, and you figure that out in a year. And you've got Stone Forsythe that you're developing with the possibility that he could be that guy. And so I think, you go do that. If Wilson's coming back. If Wilson's not coming back, then don't bother. Stick Forsythe over there and let him learn on the job. Because you're not contending. The only thing you're contending for is a top 10 draft pick if Wilson leaves. So
what else are you trying to figure out in the last 3 games?
I'm looking at some of the defensive linemen. I'm looking at making sure that
Colby Parkinson. I want to find out what we've got going on in Colby Parkinson. Like, what is going on?
Yeah.
Why haven't we seen him play in a game and catch balls? Like, come on. Yeah. Why isn't DK Metcalf catching as many balls as Cup? Like, why aren't we targeting him in a situation like that? Let's force the issue, him the ball, make him king of the offense. Let's do it. Let's find out what that looks like. Let's have fun with it. Let's find out what we've got in Josh Johnson. Let's hand the ball off to a guy that we don't even know about. Let's find out if we want to keep him around on a roster next year. Mm-hmm. Let's take a look.
Actually, interesting because of the situation that we've got at cornerback right now with Brown hurt and DJ Reed on the COVID list. We got our first good look at Bless Austin.
Mm-hmm. And he looked fun,
and he looked surprisingly decent. Like the defensive back end did not look as terrible as I expected it to look, given the fact that they're down so many players and weren't good to begin with.
Right. I mean, there were a couple of plays where it was like, what's going on? I think there's a guy by the name of Johnson that was a safety that kind of got turned around and looked like he was out of sorts covering a receiver at some point. But you're right. I mean, it's just roster discovery at this point and trying to figure out what you've got that you can carry forward, that you don't have to necessarily hyper focus on replacing in 2022. That's it. Yep. That's the end of the game here. It's been an okay season where it hasn't even been okay. I don't even know what I'm saying. It's been rotten. It's been a dumpster fire. It has. And when you take a look at our prediction show back in September, 1st of September, we did a prediction show as we always do. I'm going to be off 6 games at least. You're going to be off 5, and it is exceedingly below expectations on all fronts. And
that's a topic for another show, because I think we should go back and look at what we talked about then versus what happened now. And
no, I agree. That would be interesting.
And what happened. So, but that's a topic for another show.
All right.
Let's get out of here.
Let's do.
Cool.
Why don't you get us out of here?
Okay. So you can find Bill on Twitter at NWCHawk. You can find me at Myers NFL. You can find the show at Hawks Playbook. Find us at SeahawksPlaybook.com. You can find us on any podcast app or service that's out there. We're on every single one of them, including Spotify and all that kind of stuff. You can also find the video version of this show, which is the newest addition to it. We're now on YouTube. Go ahead and you can find us there. Go ahead and subscribe. Please subscribe. We could use the subscribers, and it helps us in a lot of different ways. So we'll see you, and we'll see you next time. And until next time, go Hawks.
Go Hawks.
Seahawks Playbook Podcast listeners, thanks for joining us for another edition of the show. You can find us on Twitter. Bill is at NWCHawk. Keith is at Myers NFL. And the show is at Hawks Playbook. You can listen and subscribe to the show at SeahawksPlaybook.com.